But we can see that from creation, from prophecy, from archaeology, from other things, we can see that the biblical narrative is actually the one with the most evidence. But even if you concluded that the God of the Bible was the creator, how would you choose between the thousands of Christian denominations? Because they all claim to believe in the Bible and they all claim to believe in Jesus. So how do you make that decision? So the game of telephone is similar to passing on of records. So ultimately, here's the question. None of us was there with any of the narratives, either the Christian narrative or Buddhist or Islam or anything like that. However, the issue is what if you could talk to someone who was there? Would that be helpful? Sure, it would be helpful. And here's the question. What if you couldn't talk to someone there, but what if you could talk to people who were there shortly thereafter? Would that be somewhat helpful? Closer. It would be closer, and that's the key. If I played telephone with only 3 people, would the message be more or less the same by the end? See, the joy of telephone is that by the end of the game, you've got something that's so different from the original message, it's unrecognizable, and that's why people criticize, right, the actual belief systems, because it's like, oh, could there be any resemblance to reality by the time you've gone through how many umpteen generations? But here's what I would like to say. If you had the possibility to have fewer people, right, shortly thereafter, like you were saying, our brother, you'd probably get closer. True or false? Probably. Yeah, probably true. Now let's talk about something that may be a little bit related or unrelated. Anyone know the largest atheist country in the world? Most atheists in this country. Yeah, it's China. And what's very interesting is China houses not only the largest number of atheists, but one other of the top 5 belief systems. Before they were atheists, what were they? Buddhists. They were Buddhists, absolutely. So when you look at China, there's also another unique feature of the traditional Chinese characters. When you look at the traditional Chinese characters, traditional Chinese is not only the oldest language that has been continuously used, but it is still used today. Did you know that? I can go to people, show them the character, and they can tell me what it means. Very intriguing. So what's very helpful with Chinese is it's not a hieroglyph. A hieroglyph means a picture of what you're trying to depict. A pictograph means it's similar, but not exact. So in other words, I know you can't speak Chinese, probably most of you, but if you look at the characters, you can kind of figure out what they could be by looking at the shapes of them. So the first books of the Bible are written 1,000 years after what I'm going to show you. So when you look at the Chinese characters, they were around a millennia and well established before you have things like the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Masoretic, whatever, old archaeological finds, okay? So what's helpful is to kind of look at this civilization because they have a narrative that's older than any other, plus it's been continually, so there's no break, right? Plus, you can verify it now. Like I can go to Google Translate, okay? And I can put in Chinese characters and I can say, show me the character for righteousness. And it will show me what I'm going to show you right now. So let's start with a word. There's no sun today, unfortunately. It's kind of cloudy. But let's talk about sky. How do you think the Chinese, again, they're atheists right now. You mentioned that. It's very true. But they were Buddhists before that. How do you suppose they would depict the word sky? Like what's in the sky? What do you think? You basically show things that are in the sky. Like you would look up and see those things. Makes sense, right? But that's actually not how they depict it. The word for sky or heaven in Chinese is tian. Tian can also be a word for God. This is very interesting. And the word tian is that character. It is, for sky, breaks down into 2 words, which means the great one. Now, if you look at one, the reason why this is one is, well, it's one line, right? Now, what's very interesting about great is it's actually a person. Do you see this upside down Y here? That is actually being. That's person or being or entity. That's one of the many words you can use for man or person. And what makes you great is this cross here. Okay. So this is person. And if you put a cross there, that's great. And if you put a one on top of it, that's a word for God. So this here is Tian, a word for God, but also sky or heaven. How about spirit? Now, there are two different words in Chinese for spirit. Ling is good spirit, and Gui is bad. So, how would you draw a spirit? What do you think? So, as Chinese, it's the word Ling. Ling is good spirit, like that's a positively connoted spirit. And you'll see that that's true in many Chinese characters. There's a good connotation and there's a bad connotation. Like there's older brother, there's younger brother, there's older brother, younger sister. There's two different words designating which one it is. And that's the same with good or bad. You can have good desires, you can have bad desires, right? But those are two different words in Chinese, whereas in English, it's a desire, but you don't know whether it's a desire for something bad or good. So interestingly, in Chinese, the word ling is a very complex character. It literally means the one over the waters in three persons that can do anything. Does that seem familiar? That description at all familiar to you? The one hovering over the waters in three persons that can do anything. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And who? Spirit. The ling of God. The word there is ling. Good spirit. The ling of God moved upon what? The face of the water. So he's over the waters, right? Now, what's interesting is God said, let who? Us. How many is us?
More than one.
More than one. That's all you have in English. Did you know that? In other languages, you have a similar problem where you have, in Spanish, you have somos or nosotros, which means the same thing, either two or more, but it could be 2, 3, it could be 500, it could be a million, right? It could be a very large number, or it can be any number that is 2 or greater, right? So you don't have any designation. But here's the wonderful thing, is that in Chinese, it's 3. Us is specifically 3 in the word ling. And it's the one over the waters in 3 persons that can do it. In Chinese, it's very clear how many us refers to. In your language and in my language and in most languages, us is very ambiguous. So that's us. There's other words for God too. There's Shen, there's Shangdi. Maybe many of you, the most common word for God in traditional Chinese is Shangdi, which literally means the heavenly emperor. So we have Tian, which is sky or heaven, that can mean God. We have Ling, which means spirit, and a very specific description of spirit. Doesn't seem to be Buddhist or atheist at all, wouldn't you say? And there's also Tian, which means the one that was revealed to the man in the garden. Wow. Does that seem to be Buddhist to you? That doesn't seem Buddhist to me. Let's look at some other words. Let's look at some non-God words, okay? Let's look at the word first, and we'll look at the word create. How would you designate first? That's a pretty easy one. How would you designate that? Yeah, just kind of a line or a dot, right? First, number 1, or right? But that's not how the Chinese designated it. What they did was, first is the man of dust that's alive. Does that sound familiar? Sure it does. It's Genesis 2:7. And the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living soul. Very interesting. This is just first, like first, second, third, first, last sort of designation. This is just a commonplace word used in Chinese. But this right here is another character that can designate man or being. And then you have dust, and then you have living, which is almost that little, this apostrophe there, okay? Let's look at the word create, okay? How would you say create? Like, how do you create things, mostly? How do you, as a human being, create? Yeah, you use your hands. So you probably involve the character of hands, right? Oh, but that's interesting that you should mention that. So you create with your hands, but how does God create? God creates with his mouth, but specifically, he creates with his word, right? Psalm 33:9 tells us, for God spake and it was done. When the centurion came to Christ, what did he ask Christ to do for his servant? Heal him. He said, I'm not worthy for you to come into my house, but speak the word only. He said, that's all that I need. And it shall be done. The centurion understood how divinity creates. Divinity creates by speaking, right? He speaks the word, and it is reality. He commanded it was done, and it stood fast, right? So let's take a look at finish, or complete, or done, right? That might be like something and then kind of an end to it. Yeah, something like that, exactly. But in Chinese, this is where you find the word finished in the Christian narrative. Thus, the heavens and the earth were what? Finished, right? And all the hosts. But what's funny is the verse right before that, what was finished? Does anyone know what was finished right before Genesis 2:1? The earth? What specifically? Right before Genesis 2:1. Yes, exactly. The verse was, so God created man, male and female, just two of them, by the way, created he them. And in Chinese, what's beautiful is that you have another word for first here. Two persons were first. Isn't that neat? And you take the word first and you put a little roof over them, and then you have complete. So the first two people in their home was complete. Amazing, isn't it? That is literally verbatim the description of Genesis 1:27. In a language of atheists and Buddhists? Interesting. So we've already seen garden before, but I'll show you the symbol again. So garden is a little area with four lines coming out from the middle of it. Okay? What does that mean to you? Does that mean anything to you? Genesis 2, verses 10 to 14. Strong work. A river watering the garden flowed from Eden, and from there it was separated into four headwaters. Very interesting, isn't it? There's another word for garden. This is yuan. And it literally means two people made from the dust that can speak or have mouths. And what's very interesting is that these two symbols, see how this is a symbol for person and this is person? But the thing is that this one is coming out of the other person, like coming out of the side of the person. Ever heard of that before? Yes. And God planted a garden where? Eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. But here's the thing. Which direction was the garden? Now, where would it be for the Chinese, though? West, right? Because think about it. Where is supposedly the Garden of Eden? Where was it supposed to be? Kind of Middle East, right? But China's where? Yeah, it's to the east, so it's even west for them, right? And what's interesting is the word for west is one person in the garden. So that's the word for west. So when they say go west, they would say go back to where Adam was created in the garden. That doesn't seem atheist to me. Does it seem to you? That's weird. Okay, here's an easy one to draw. How would you draw or depict happiness? A smiley face, right? That's easy, right? No, the Chinese said one man with God in the garden is happiness. If only Adam had believed that. If only he did. Did he think he could be happy with just him and God in the garden? No, he did not. And many of us feel the same. I'm going to tell you right now, no matter what people tell you, no matter what society tells you, you and God are complete. You and God are the majority. Don't let anyone tell you anything different. Christ can complete you. And when you believe that, you will not compromise to find fulfillment or happiness. You see, Adam didn't think he could be happy without Eve, right? So he chose Eve in defiance to God's command. Who is the word of happiness? Unfortunately, he did not believe in true food. Now, here's something that's necessary or wanted or desired. Not necessarily, the happiness thing, but this is like a little icing on the cake. But this is a good desire, okay? A good desire is the word west plus the word for woman. So remember what west was? Does anyone remember what the derivation for west was? One man in the garden, right? So one man in the garden plus the woman is something desired. It is not good, right, that man should be alone. But he could still be happy, right? He could still be happy, he could still be complete. But it's not good, right? God wanted not just what you need, but he wants like the icing, right? He wants the abundance, right, for you. So that was good, and that was desired. But that's a positive desire. We're going to look at a negative desire coming up too. So literally one man in the garden with the woman is desired. Now, here's another word, naked. Now that doesn't seem positive to you, but there is actually a positive naked, and there's also a negative naked in Chinese. Now, this is the positive naked, okay? This would be like innocent, unadulterated, pure, that sort of connotation, as you can imagine. So what thing is absolutely pure, but it's naked, but it's just the way it should be? Yeah, baby, sure, right? Easy. No, in Chinese, it's a very funny word called guangguang. And let me ask this question first. What did Adam and Eve wear? No, you said robes of light. You said light too. Everybody immediately said that. Do you know some audiences don't know that? Now, why would they not know that? Where did you get that idea? See, I like the honesty. I like Tiffany because I asked her where she got that from. And she said very plainly, Ellen White. Because you get the idea in the biblical account that Adam and Eve were clothed with, when you said robes of light, somebody even said robes of light, not just something was shining on their naked body, but you actually said robes of light that actually covered them. Do you get that idea from the biblical text? Not at all. Let's take a look at it. And they were both what? Guangguang. They were both Guangguang. The man and his wife, but they were not ashamed. Now, that almost seems to be a contradiction, doesn't it? Doesn't that seem to be like almost an oxymoron or a dichotomy, right? How could they possibly be naked but not ashamed? Now, in your worldview, which is uniquely Adventist, do you know why I want to say it's uniquely Adventist? How many of you have seen artist depictions of the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve? How many of them show them drawn with robes of light? No. But few, even Adventist art depictions are usually the evangelical understanding. Did you know that? They always have plants or animals kind of strategically placed, rated G, right? So it's definitely not what you're saying. You're saying they were clothed with not just light, but you're saying robes of light, meaning that was actually their covering. But I'm telling you right now, that is nowhere in the biblical account. You cannot derive that. You cannot come to that conclusion. In fact, I've talked to atheist audiences, and one came up to me and says, thank you for deriving guangguang, because when I was learning that as a child, I looked at my mom and I said, how can this be naked? And the answer was, shut up and learn it. And the reason why this child questioned is guangguang is derived from two words, guang and guang. So that's two words. But the word guang by itself means light. And what's very interesting is that guang by itself actually means shining person or person covered, or the light was over them. Interesting? I would say that's divine. When you look at the word naked, you can ask somebody in traditional Chinese, guangguang, but then cover this one and say, what's that? Well, that's light. But the real question is, why is that? They will look at you with a blank expression. And probably say, you know, I asked the same question when I was a kid. And I was told to shut up and learn. Guam Guam is innocent, is holy, is unadulterated, is pure, is the design for humanity. And you know that that design was being clothed in robes of light, but you did miss one thing. It's very interesting. You appropriately shared. I've had people try to convince me it's in the Bible, and I say, well, show me in the Bible. Show me the verse in the Bible that tells you that. And they can't find it, of course. Patriarchs and Prophets 45. The sinless pair wore no artificial garments. They were clothed with a covering of what? But not just light and glory. Such as the angels wear. But here is the condition to keep your wardrobe. So long as they lived in what? Obedience to God, this robe of light continued to instruct them. So they were covered literally with a covering of light. It wasn't artificial, it was divine, right? But it wasn't just light, it was light and glory. So let's look at that. The word glory in Chinese is rong. And what's interesting about rong is two people in flame before or in front of or on top of a tree. And the word for flame is huo, so huo in front of the tree. Now, let me ask you this question. That's an interesting derivation. This is rong. But what might this tree be? Is it a tree, a myrtle tree? The tree of life. Why does it have to be the tree of life? Because the condition for keeping your garments is what? Obedience. Obedience. And the tree of life represents obedience, right? It's not rocket science, right? God did not create some difficult condition to fulfill. He just says, just keep doing what you're doing. Just keep eating from the tree of life. What keeps you alive is what also keeps you holy. So important. What keeps you holy is what keeps you alive. I presented the Blue Zones to Kaylee when she was 7, and she was actually engaged and interested. And the concept is that the NIH does the Adventist Health Study every year, and they spend millions of dollars doing this, and they will continue to spend millions of dollars. You know why? They're trying to find out how we get 10 extra years over the baseline population without God. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for, oh, maybe it's the diet, maybe it's this, maybe it's the air you're breathing. Live in Loma Linda, please. That's like sweet home Loma Linda, where the skies are hazy blue. Right? It's like one of the worst air quality areas of the world, right? At least in the US, for sure. But they're trying to derive those 10 years without God. Do you think Steve Jobs would have paid you something for an extra 10 years? You know, he died of pancreatic cancer, right? He was in his 50s, right? I mean, really, really young guy. I mean, what do you think he would have given for another year? Like 2 years, maybe. He would have given you everything he had. But we have 10 extra years on average, right? But the thing is, you can't separate what makes you holy from what continues to give you life. You cannot do that. And that is why in the end, people will cease to exist. Because God will finally pull away from them. He's giving them life for a time. Artificially, He's got them on the bench. Do you realize that? Everyone who has sinned, including us, God has just put you on artificial resuscitation. Because He gives you time to display your character and gives you time to accept it. Christ doesn't get you off of that. Right? But this is interesting. Adam and Eve were clothed in light and glory as long as they what? Obeyed God, right? So this has to be the tree of life. Now I want you to remember this because we're going to see another tree in just a little bit. Now, what's very interesting is at this point you ask, how in the world is Patriarchs and Prophets, which was written in 1900, right, near the turn of the century, How is that related to the oldest language on planet Earth? How is a woman from Gorham, Maine, related to the oldest continuously used and still used language on planet Earth? Well, that's the question, right? That's the million-dollar question. So how in the world could 20 million people, which is a very small denomination, right? And we're very young, 1844 would be not even 200 years. You know, we're not even as old as this country. And this is one of the newest countries. By the way, anyone know the newest country in the world? Anyone know? If you know, I'm impressed. I was there for a genocide. Give you a hint. Sudan, Southern Sudan, separated from Northern Sudan. So they could stop being genocide, basically. So when you look at the criticism is that if you have a denomination that is new, right, they will accuse you of copying other people. Does that make sense? Oh, you just came on the scene in 1844, you just copied other people that were already there. Does that make sense? So that's the accusation, but we now find a connection that you cannot derive certain Chinese characters correctly without being Seventh-day Adventist. Okay, I'm ready to fall over, right? What in the world? I've had people try to fight this. I've had atheist people come to my seminars and they said, I got the answer. I said, what's the answer? Ellen White was Chinese. And I'm like, very nice. Let me show you a picture of her. Now the thing is, she does have an Asian nose. Did you know that? But do you know why she has an Asian nose? Broken by a rock when she was 9, right? If you look at her twin, not just sister, but her twin sister. Did you know that? She's got a different nose. She's got a white, like pointy Caucasian nose, right? He doesn't look, Ellen's got the Asian nose, you know? And I said, nice try. Then he later tried Moses was Chinese, and I'm like, okay, thousands of miles different, and like 2,000 years later, but nice attempt. So we look at the original plan, but why is there suffering and evil? You know, right? Tell me why there's suffering and evil. Why there's sickness. Why there's cancer. Because of what? Disobedience. Well, what's another word for that? What's a 3-letter word for that? Sin, sure. Now, who sinned? Okay, who sinned on planet Earth first?
No, Eve.
Well, it's interesting. So you say Eve, and let's look at the word for forbidden. What was the sin that happened? When I tell you something's forbidden, how would you depict that or derive that? How would you draw it? Again, it's easy, right? Easy or a circle with an X, or you know, don't smoke, right? They don't have to use words to depict that. Just draw a cigarette and then, right? Very simple. But in Chinese, when I say something is forbidden, I tell you jin. And jin is God tells you something about 2 trees. I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you. You can look at it yourself. Where are the 2 trees in this character? Do you see them? Yeah, they're on the top. Now, are they the same 2 trees? Or are they 2 different trees? Look carefully. They're 2 different trees. Which one is the tree of life? The one on the right. Now, why is it the one on the right? Out of the ground, the Lord God made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Jin, this is forbidden to you. So you told me it's the one on the left, it's the bad tree, right? But you said the good tree was where? On the right. And what do you know? Desire of Ages tells us that too. The angel of the Lord was standing on which side? The right side of the altar. The position of the angel was an indication of favor. So when Zechariah saw the angel, like, boom, there's, oh, whoa, right? He freaked, but he didn't freak because the angel was on which side? So that means I'm telling you what? Something good, right? Something positive. The Urim and the Thummim, same thing, right? The positive answer was the right, versus the cloud or the shadow would have been on the left, which was negative or disfavor. Does that make sense? But then again, people could say, you know, that's not necessarily Adventist. But watch this. In the midst of the garden stood the tree of life. surpassing in glory how many other trees? So which, just on this description, must be the bigger, more symmetrical, or more glorious tree?
Bigger.
The one on the right. Why? This one's kind of lost a little bit. Does that make sense? This one's kind of shortchanged. Do you see that? Our description of the tree of life exactly matches the kind. And you can derive not only that those are two trees, but which trees and which tree is which. Because you are Seventh-day Adventist, you have that advantage. It surpassed all other trees. Its fruit appeared like apples of gold and silver, and it has the power to perpetuate life. At the very beginning of man's existence, a check was placed upon the desire for self-indulgence, the fatal passion that laid the foundation of Satan's fall. The tree of knowledge, which stood where? Is it close or not that close? It's close. It stood near to the tree of life. Now, there's a reason why you understand why it's near. How often do you have to go visit the tree of life? Just once? Continuously, right? Because if you don't continuously eat of it, what happens? You die, right? It's the tree of life. You got to be connected. But the thing is, every time you went over to the tree of life, what's right near it? Dessert. Yeah, there you go. A deadly dessert, right? A deadly dessert. The tree of knowledge, which stood near to the tree of life in the midst of the garden, was to be a test of the obedience, faith, and love of our parents. While permitted to eat freely of every other tree, they were forbidden to taste of this on pain of death, but they were also to be what? Now, here's the thing. The biblical text, does it tell you that the tree of life is right next to the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Does it say that? No, it doesn't. It says somewhere in the garden, in the middle, right? But we don't know how big the garden was. Was it this big? Was it like several acres? We don't know, right? It doesn't say that. But what it does say is in the middle, we found X, Y, or Z. But they were to be exposed to the temptation of Satan. So if you have to be exposed to Satan's temptations, it makes sense that where would they be placed? Right next to each other. So eventually, you've got to come eat of the tree of life, right? To keep moving, to keep going, right? So that is the concept of not only the biblical understanding, right? But with the biblical understanding only, you don't get the whole picture. But with the Adventist understanding, you know that they're going to be tempted, right? And they were near, not just in the middle somewhere in the garden, but it was near, right? And in the Chinese character, it's definitely, I don't think you can get any nearer than this. Does that make sense? But let's say the word devil, or devil is evil spirit, which is gui. How would you derive gui? How would you draw it? Definitely not how. How would the world draw the devil? Yeah, horns and a tail, a pitchfork, right? But how might you draw gui? As an angel. As an angel? Okay, anything else? Where did they meet the devil the first time? With a snake. Ooh, I like that. What else? They met him in the garden. So the garden is going to be there. And did he show up and say, "Hi, I'm the devil"? Was he himself, or was he deceiving, or was he hidden, or what was it? Now, it's interesting. How did you know he was in the tree? Who was he? So here's the thing. You claim that the devil was in the tree. You not only said he was in the garden, he said he was in the garden. You're saying he's in the tree. I want to know how you know he was in the tree. And I'm not going to say, I'm just going to let you think about it for a little while. But let's start off with devil. Gui is very simple. There is a man in secret alive in the garden. There is a, or you can even say there is a secret man alive in the garden. Or is there's a man under secret or keeping a secret alive in the garden. Now, where do you see a description of that? Now, the serpent was more subtle, right, or secret. than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, Yea, hath God said, You shall not eat of every tree of the garden. Patriarch and prophet says, Thus in the garden of peace lurked the destroyer, watching for his prey. But does the Bible tell you he was in the garden? Yes or no?
No.
No, yes, it does. It says he was in the garden, right? But you claim he's not only in the garden, but where did you say he was, sister? He was actually in the trees.
In the tree of life.
Well,
No.
No.
It was in the-
well, let's take a look, okay? Let's talk about the word temptation first, okay? Where did the first temptation occur? According to you, it occurred where? In the trees. Who, Adam and Eve, right? And who was the tempter? Satan, the devil, right? So you're looking at the word we plus where? Where did he tempt them? In the trees. But how do you know that? Only Ellen White. Now you can assume, right, that it was in the trees because many artist depictions draw it that way. Not just our denomination, right? They'll show the snake in the tree, handing the apple to Eve, sort of, you know what I mean? Something like that. So that may be where you derive it. But as far as the strict biblical text, you can't assume that. You can take a look, see if you can find it. Show me that he was in the tree. But here's the word for temptation or tempter. The devil is hiding in the trees. The devil's hiding in the trees. And he will tempt you from the trees. Ellen White knew that the enemy would hide himself in some way in the trees. And the reason why she knew that is he was taken there in vision and shown the tomb. My fathers knew because they were there. And they heard the story of the fall from their father, from their grandfather, from their great-grandfather. My fathers knew the story of the fall. And they embedded that story with all of its details in the very heart for all generations. You never forget. You know, because you are Seventh-day Adventists. My fathers knew because they were. So let's look at the spirit of prophecy. In order to accomplish his work unperceived, Satan chose to employ as his medium, the serpent, a disguise, right? So remember, this is the devil. Here's the garden. There's a man in the garden, alive, in secret, but he's also covered. So he's double secret, right? Double deception. Well adapted for his purpose of deception. 1 Spirit Prophecy 35, Satan entered into his serpent and took his position where? In the tree. In the tree. He took his position in the tree. Clearly said in the Spirit of Prophecy. Clearly given right here. Can you see them? They're right there. Clearly given in my language. Not so clear in the Bible. You need another light to show you clearly where to put your next step. And that is why the Spirit of Prophecy is more important today than ever. I can read you paragraphs in the Great Controversy that sound just what we're going through right now. Give you a little teaser. The world and the church will unite to bribe, persuade, or compel all classes. Have you seen any bribery lately? Any compulsion? Any persuasion? Just take Sunday out and put something else in. Now let's talk about a negative desire. Remember, positive desire was one man in the garden with who? The woman, right? Eve, right? Now this is a negative desire, okay? And the negative word for desire is yun. And yun is the woman approaches the fruit trees. This is the character for woman. And what's this again?
2 trees.
There can be no doubt. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, then it was pleasant to the eyes. A tree to be desired to make one wise. Was this a good desire or bad desire? Bad. He took of the fruit thereof and did eat. Now watch this. We're going to go to naked now. And I'm going to ask you another question that you probably will know the answer to. Maybe some of you won't. I hope all of you will. But there's a negative word for naked. Okay? Remember, the positive word was guang guang, which means two people of like, right? This is the negative naked. This would be the naked like there was a final exam at school. You showed up, you didn't study, and then you look down and you're naked. Right? It's that kind of dream. Has anyone had that dream? Don't tell me. I already know. It's okay. The common dream, right? So this is a negatively connotated word for naked. And the word for naked is law. And law is man eats the fruit and becomes naked. Now let me ask you this question. After who ate the fruit was their nakedness? No, wait. I thought you told me that Eve was the first one to sin. When did they disrobe? You remember? When did they lose their robes of light? After Adam. But how do you know that? What is it? The spirit of prophecy tells you that. Because the Bible actually does the reverse. If you look later in Galatians, it says, who is first in the transgression? The woman, right? But when did the robes disappear? You told me after Adam's transgression and my father's faith. You can easily put woman here, could you not? Not when the nakedness occurred. Not just the event, but the detail and the order is described and derived by my fathers. They tell the same story. The spirit of prophecy. The patriarch and prophets. Line for line and every detail is derived the same. Now, interestingly enough, naked can be many different characters, but they're all law. And it can be man plus fruit. It can be clothing for us plus fruit. But it's basically something plus fruit. Thinking that if you eat the fruit, you're naked. Right? And here's how you know. After his transgression, Adam at first imagined entering upon a higher state of existence. Because if Eve shows up, right, she's got all the fruit. Hey, wait a minute. Where's your robe, babe? There is something seriously wrong. Right? If he were to say, here, have some fruit, honey. I'm like, no. I just finished eating. I brushed my teeth. I don't eat between meals. No. Or definitely no. You have eaten the wrong tree. In fact, the spirit of prophecy says that he knew that this must have been the enemy that they were warned about. So he didn't know that she had lost her innocence, because Ellen White even says she stood before him just as beautiful as she always had been, professing even greater love for him, right? That's the deception. That you're not going to be happy God's way, that the devil has something better for you. He has nothing for you. Do you realize he can't even make up stuff? He can't create stuff. He has to just take what God has and pervert it. He can't even make his own things. He can't create a mosquito, right? But he can pervert the mosquito. Adam first imagined him entering upon a higher state of existence. Then the robe of light which had enshrouded him now disappeared. It was after whose sin? After his transgression, right? And to supply its place, they endeavored to fashion for themselves a covering. Let's say pain or sorrow. What's the cause of pain or sorrow? Sin. Like what specifically? What did you do? Separation from God. But what was the first sin? And what was the disobedient thing? Eating from the tree. And what's the result with the pain and sorrow? death, but I mean, even before that. Who was the first person who was told that they would experience pain? You remember in the Bible? Eve, yeah. Right. Okay. Childbearing. And what was the next thing after that? Well, I'll show you, right? Pain and sorrow is when you eat from the two trees, you're placed under the man. That's just what it means. I'm just saying. Okay. I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception in what? Pain. And the word pain is chu. Chu. In two, you shall bring forth children, and your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall what? Rule over you, or you shall be placed under the man because of the two trees. How do you say the word guard? This seems totally unrelated, right? How would you draw a guard? Someone guarding something. Sword and shield, some kind of weapon, a person with a weapon, a person with armor, or something like that, right? No, Chinese said, no, but it's a little bit different. There is a man at the entrance to the tree. And which tree? It's got to be. Yes, it has to be the tree of life. There's a man or being, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily man, right? So he drove out the man and he placed at the east of the garden cherubim and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree. Bao is guard. So Bao in Chinese is the exact derivation of the description of Genesis. No question. So our first two parents fell, but you know, you can't put the blame on them because what happened to the next kids, the next generation? How did they fare? Did they do better? They did worse. Let's talk about brother, okay? This is big brother and little brother. But let's talk about elder brother, which is Xiong. And Xiong basically means the man who speaks. That's older brother. But again, you don't need the Bible to know that because most Eastern societies, who's the spokesperson for each family? The oldest male, right? The man who speaks is the older brother. Xiong. What's very interesting is Xiong, his elder brother, but Xiong means violent person or murderer. Who is the first murderer? The older brother. Dum, dum, dum. Okay. And Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. Here's murder, and here's violent person. So it's literally older brother. Do you see the character with older brother? It's literally the character of older brother with a mark on him. Right? Where did the mark come from? Who put the mark there? Now, was Cain black? Right? You've heard that, right? I'm sure you've heard people say that. That Cain was black or Ham was black. Was that the mark? Was it a curse? What was the purpose of the mark? So no one would kill him. Thank you. So was it a negative mark? No, he complained, right? God says, I'm having to drive you out now. He's like, it's too much for me because the first person I run into is going to slay me. I said, God, okay, they're not going to slay you. I'm going to put a mark of protection, right? Now, what's very interesting with this mark is that the mark looks very much like a number in Chinese. Yo is murder or violent person. But the mark just by itself is the number 7. Is that interesting? Qi is the number 7. Qi is the sun. So this literally breaks down to the man commits murder, right? The one who speaks with the number 7. Now, why would it be 7? Rachel, why would it be 7? Perfect number Anything more exact than that? Ah, interesting. The Lord said unto him, therefore, whoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him what? Sevenfold cheap. The character is complete and perfect. But let's talk about the remedy for sin as we close. You can either be sinful or you can be what?
Sinless.
Sinless? What's the opposite of sin without using sinless? Righteous, sure, righteousness, perfect. The character for righteousness is ye. Very simple. Ye. One syllable, ye. 2 letters, ye. And the character for righteousness is the Lamb for me. That's the character for righteousness. And if you want more, the word me breaks down to hand and knife. So this literally says, my hand took the knife, killed the lamb. And my friends, my fathers understood the way of life because they heard the gospel from their father and from their grandfather, from their great-grandfather who received it. And you see why it's important to go earlier as much as possible? We need the right message because things can get blurred. And that's why God sends us a little refresher. Praise his name in the spirit of prophecy, right? So literally, this character is my hand took the knife, I killed the lamb, and he covers me. Now, do you see how you're covered? Do you see the character for me is right here? And on top of it is the character for what? Lamb. Right? You see that? So it's literally the lamb over me. The lamb over me. And my fathers knew that. And you know that. The next day, John sees Jesus coming to him and says, behold who? The Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world. Brothers and sisters, there is no salvation apart from the Lamb. There is no victory apart from Jesus Christ. But you have a work to do, right? You must say that it was your hand, not your father's, not your mother's, not the person who tempted you, not the person who molested you, not the person who was on drugs when they had you, right? No blame. No blame. But on you. It was your hand that took the knife, killed the lamb, and healed. That is the gospel. There is no other gospel than that. I shared this message. There was a guy who was a dentist. Peter was coming to our church just once or twice. I mean, this might have been the first sermon he heard. I presented this. He started coming just because we did afternoon activities, like bike rides and stuff. He was atheist. He told me straight. He was atheist. I gave this sermon. He sat in the back of the church for half an hour after everybody left. Just staring off into space. And I said, Peter, are you okay? What's going on? And he looked up to me and says, my middle name is Steve. He had the gospel embedded in his own name. And he asked me, he said, why aren't sermons like this given? This is the best message I've ever heard. He's like, why has no one ever told me this? Although he's Korean, all Korean characters are derived from Chinese. All Chinese kanji, all Japanese kanji are derived from, from the Chinese language. So in the face of the gospel, right? Who should we look to? Jesus, right? And now let's look at a completely non-religious word, okay? As we close, I'm going to give you the word example. Wait, let's read this first. To Adam, the offering of the first sacrifice was a most painful ceremony. His what? Hand must be raised to take life, which only God could give. And as he slew the innocent victim, he trembled at the thought that his sin must shed the blood of the spotless Lamb of God. Ye is righteousness. For God hath made Christ to be sin for us, who knew no sin, that we might be made the ye of God in him. So let's look. Let me give you an example. Okay? Literally, the word for example is yang in Chinese. Y-A-N-G. Yang. Let's bring up the pronouns yang. Okay? Who is the greatest example of all time? Christ. In what act of Christ was the greatest example of all time?
Selfless act
Of doing what?
of dying for our sins
Dying where?
on the cross.
To give us what?
Eternal life.
Not just life, but what?
Eternal life.
Eternal life. And the word for young is the lamb lifted up on the tree to bring back. And wait, there's more. Which tree is this?
Life.
How can you tell? Yeah, it's got that more be. Jesus didn't have to die because we chose the right tree, guys. Jesus had to die. Sin. Jesus was killed by our sin. He had to die so that we might live. I want you to understand that eventually someone becomes so sick with cardiomyopathy, congestive heart failure, whatever, stent after stent won't work, bypass won't work, no meds will work, no pressors will work. When that person's heart is so bad, they go on a list. You know what that list is? A transplant list. And you know what every single person on that transplant list is begging and praying will happen? That someone will die. By the way, you can't be on any transplant list anymore unless you're vaccinated. That's just a little thing I'm throwing out there right now. They're talking about limiting ICU beds on people who are vaccinated too. But right now, you're out of the transplant list. Like you're hasta la bye-bye. But everyone on that list is praying that someone will die. Because in order for you to live, someone else has to die. Why did Jesus have to die? Because he's the only human being that lived and developed a perfect character. And he offers now to give it back to you and I. You can't die for me, no offense, because you're just as big as I am. Your heart's just as bad as mine is. If I transplant from you, I won't last. I might last a little longer, right? Because you maybe haven't been as bad as me, right? But Jesus dies for your sin. To give you back not just life, but eternal.